Hello. This is Ian Williams from the Foreign Press Association in the middle of New York, which is suffering from a heat wave, and if some people will believed, about to become an Islamic or Soviet republic because Sohan uh, has just won the Democratic primary. I don't believe any of these things, by the way, but fearmongers work on all parts of the world, and here no less. I hope to get Zorhan for a Foreign Press Association press briefing at some point. I didn't want to interrupt him while the election campaign was going on. But in the meantime, it's 38 centigrade here, over 100 Fahrenheit for the Brits who still might use Fahrenheit. Oh no, Americans who use Fahrenheit. And it's my pleasure to introduce today Jenny Stout, whose book, have we got it the right way around? Night Train to Odessa came out last year and won prizes. And I read it with great interest and appreciation because it wasn't just a sort of a vignette of life in war-torn Ukraine from somebody who is not an instant Russophobe and is able to take an objective view of these things, but still coming down on the side of the angels in the end. I don't believe in journalistic objectivity in the face of evil. It's my own predilection. And Jennifer's, well, she did a do-it-yourself foreign correspondent almost. Basically, without major funding, she went to the Ukraine on several trips and financed it with freelance contributions to local radio stations, which is an aberration almost in American terms, because the American radio stations that can afford foreign news, uh, that put on foreign news, can't afford to pay anyone for it. So it's the last gasp of the BBC with Jenny, I think, but you can
Just,
explain more of that. And the
just
other
Jen,
part,
Ian. You're giving me all sorts of names today. It's just Jen,
Jen. Okay,
right?
sorry. I'm used to being polite because I do,
Yes, no, my name's on the front of the book, so it's just Jen.
Oh, it is
Um,
Jen. Okay, yes, yes, yes.
yes. Yeah, local radio. Gosh, I mean, I wouldn't say it funded the trips because it pays very, very badly. But yeah, there are lots of last gasps of the BBC, as you say. I used to work in local radio on the BBC, and they're a brilliant place, and some of them would want reports. But yeah, that sort of stuff is all really dying off, sadly.
Yeah, and I mean, war correspondents, we think of people in the past. We think of Ernest Hemingway, for example, and the others. To some extent, they were almost dilettante correspondents. They were often came from well-heeled backgrounds and parachuted in and stayed
Well,
at the best
particularly him.
hotels. Pardon?
Particularly him, yeah.
Yes. And so, not detracting from their work, George Orwell is another one that springs to mind, of course.
Mm.
He went there and made his, did his own thing in Barcelona, um, and it came out as Catalonia. So, Jen, like, can you explain to our assembled audience how did you first get there? And I should explain that you come from the Shetlands, which for Americans and people not from Britain is almost, I think it was Ultima Thule according to the Greek
The map
geographers. It
makers.
was almost off the edge of the known world, up up where the Atlantic meets the Arctic, and
Yeah.
a sort of way station for passing Vikings. Uh, and I think the Viking strain is still there because nobody could ever bother replacing them in such a desolate, far-off place. But people speak very highly of the Shetlands, and there was a nice TV series recently, so it shouldn't be a total stranger. So, how did you get from the Shetlands to Kiev?
So Shetland is a group of islands in between Scotland and Norway. It used to be owned by Norway till 1460s. Desolate, I would say, is in the eye of the beholder. Usually, that's people from the southeast of England say that kind of stuff.
So I
Um,
come from
we
Liverpool.
we have plenty of trees. Well, we have some trees. Yeah, so I come from the smallest inhabited island there, which is called Fair Isle. It has a population of 50, 60 people, and I think because of coming from a place like that, we're seen as remote, but actually we always say remote from what? From London, who cares? And actually, Shetland used to be at the centre of the seafaring world, and people were still involved in the merchant navy. It was really normal when I was growing up for people to go away all around the world and to come back. And I think that gave me a very adventurous spirit, you know? It wasn't a big deal to go off when you were quite young, still a teenager, to go off really far away to foreign countries. And that's what I wanted to do. And also because a teacher in Shetland taught me Russian, and that really set me on this path of studying the Russian language and Russian history, and also then getting into learning about Ukraine as well and other places oppressed by the Russian Empire in its various guises. So that was and I read lots of Martha Gellhorn because you mentioned Ernest Hemingway. He was a great novelist. I think he was a questionable war reporter because he made lots of stuff up, which is kind of defeating the purpose, and also stole her commission to go to D-Day because he persuaded the editors that they wanted a man really, that a woman couldn't do it. So she stowed away on a boat and did some of the finest war reporting I've ever read, whereas his stuff was sort of vastly fabricated and seemed to place himself at the head of as if he was the commander of a unit. Anyway, read Martha Gellhorn is my
He was
advice
big,
for you.
hairy, and had a beard. How could he fail?
Yeah, well, exactly. But that's what gets me is that he's still, when people think of war reporters today, he's still like the first name that comes. And I think, gosh, how strange that even after all this time, the sort of meritocracy doesn't win out. John Steinbeck as well. I loved his writing. He did actually. He's not known so much for this, but he did war reporting from the UK and then from liberated Europe, and it's beautiful, really vivid, really non-judgmental in the same way that Gellhorn is. And that's always what I had in mind. I thought, gosh, I want to be in the middle of things and I want to write as vividly and beautifully as possible so that I can make people feel that they're there with me. It took me a long time, right? Because if you come from a kind of crofting peasant background and you don't have any money and you set off into the world hoping to be a foreign journalist and you're up against, it's a really difficult job to get into. It's a really difficult industry to get into. All these people who say, "Oh, I just went," when they're 19, and you say, "Well, how did you just go to Moscow and live
A
there?
lot
How
of
did
their
you?"
names would be hyphenated, I
They
suspect.
are, and they have the right accents, and they get in with the right people, and that everyone knows that's the system. Perhaps it's changing a little bit now, but I was always trying to get onto sort of fellowships and schemes and grants and so on, and I got a grant to do my journalism training in Liverpool on the NCTJ, where you do your shorthand and law, quite old-fashioned British journalism training.
You have to take
And work.
language courses.
I worked in a local paper in Stranraer, which was great training for everything. I mean, I think that's such an essential thing to do as a journalist, to get you ready for the world. And I worked at the BBC for a while in TV and radio. And all the time I was trying to get to Moscow. I was going to Ukraine, on holiday and so on. And then I finally got to Moscow on a fellowship. I left the BBC. It was November 21 on the Alpha Fellowship. And this was a 9-month kind of study and work thing.
What year was that, sorry?
This was November 2021. So
Mm.
I had read yeah, I'd read a lot of Anna Politkovskaya. I had followed her work, and I had this mad idea that maybe I could go and do my internship at Novaya Gazeta, which was still just about going. But the idea that I could do that, it was so naive. I mean, there was no real opportunity to do real journalism in Russia at that point. It was far too dangerous, and um, we were restricted in what we could do and who we could talk to. And also with the foreign agent status affecting so many people in Russia, particularly journalists, a lot of people just didn't really want to talk to us. And I entirely understood that. And then, of course, the troop buildup was happening already when I arrived. It was, those early months of 2022, 150,000 troops building up on the border, and just this massive sense of that something was coming, and we didn't really know what. I didn't think it would be a full-scale invasion. I was wrong.
Well, that's you were in on the ground when it all happened. So, I mean, what are the major pitfalls that a young freelance independent, and when I say independent, I mean without logistical support, correspondent needs to look out for in situations like that?
Oh, I think I got lucky because I had to just trust people, and I trusted. I found some amazing people. Um, when I think the networks as well. Do you remember at the beginning of the full scale invasion, there were these huge networks of volunteers springing up all over Europe in particular, and they were getting people from one place to another. They were getting aid. It was on Facebook, it was on WhatsApp, it was lots and lots of women in particular. And I knew people involved in this, in Germany, in Romania, in Ukraine as well. And so when I left Russia very quickly, obviously, and I found myself in Vienna with not many belongings and no money really. And I thought, well, I'm not going home. I'm going to go and try and cover this, even just at the border in Romania at first. And it was a friend who was involved in helping, in these networks, helping Ukrainians, helping aid get to the border. She said, "Oh, if you get to Bucharest, I'll get you a lift. You can get a lift in this van with some random guy, And I'm like, okay, let's go. And there's a lot of dangers involved in that, I suppose. There's lots and lots of pitfalls involved in that, but you do have to try and trust your gut and decide who you're going to rely on. And I got lucky. I met these volunteers at the port in Romania, so I actually stayed there for a few weeks, living in the boat repair workshop of a guy that I'd met because they had a bed in the upstairs of this little factory. And it was amazing. I mean, they like fed me all this Romanian food. They lent me a car, introduced me to Soika, the plum brandy, and helped me report every day. And I couldn't really have done it without them. And that was me just establishing myself as a freelancer with newspapers and radio on that border. And I think a
In
key
some of
thing,
it is good training to be a foreign correspondent.
yeah, a good thing about well, a good point for those who want to do that kind of get into that kind of work. Say you find yourself in the middle of the biggest story in the world, and it was at the time. If you're a freelancer and you don't really have very good like established connections with editors, and you need to be in the place where the other correspondents aren't, and that requires lots of local knowledge. So it was a friend of mine who lives in Romania. She said, "Well, Jen, if you go to Siret, some of the Medica, the big border crossings, where all the BBC correspondents were there, all the big newspaper guys." And so they're not going to take stuff from you because you're just another voice. They've got someone there. But if you find an interesting place without much coverage, and this was Izacha, and it was Eleanor, a friend of mine in Romania, who suggested I go to Izacha and got me the lift to go there. And it's down in Dobruja in the southeast where the Danube forms the border between Romania and Ukraine. I had no idea where I was going. I really didn't know a lot about Romania. So I had, I learned a lot. I read a lot. I read a lot of history and wanted to get a grip of it and kind of spent a lot of time just talking to people about this region, about how they felt about the war, how they felt about Russia, about their own trajectory with Romania and the EU, just to build up a bigger picture so that I could start doing not just on the ground reports, but really kind of longer essays with context and explain the bigger picture. That's what I really enjoy doing. But I just landed on my feet in this beautiful place, and I'm forever grateful that I went to Izacha.
So, I mean, what are the fruits of your researches? Because we tend to see things through binary prisms here. It's either everybody loves Russia or everybody hates Russia. Russians have a hard time or whatever. I'm presuming you found that they were far more balanced in their approach. That
Who was balanced? Sorry.
the locals, I mean, were
Uh,
they rabidly anti-Russian or sort of, oh well,
I think they were reasonably anti-Russian.
reasonably anti-Russian. That's a great phrase, yes.
I mean, I mean that in both senses of the word. They were scared with good reason. They're scared of Russia. They always have been. They know what Russia can do. They know what it's done in the past. I mean, look, as having said that, it's a nuanced situation because, of course, especially in that part of the world, Romania and Ukraine don't have the best relationship. The border there has changed hands. The
And
Romanians were part of the Nazi forces going in and murdered every Jew in Odessa, in the 40s. It's a complicated history. But I think at that point, really, I was so impressed by the volunteer force. Everybody in that part of the world was just pitching in and trying to help out. And when I asked them why, they said, well, there's so many times I was told this, it could be us, it could be us, it could be us next. As well as the kind of basic principle of human solidarity. And I think as well, people were getting a lot of energy. It feels good to help people, right? To be involved in something and to
yeah.
rise to this challenge. I mean, they house so many people, so many people. And this is the poorest part of Romania, which is a poor country. So yeah, anti-Russian, yes, because they're I mean they're the same way you would find in the Baltic states and in any of the countries directly threatened by Russia.
Well, did people distinguish between the Russian state and Russian people? Was it because it is very
Sure.
difficult if a country, you know, in Britain we talked about the Hun and the Bosch and things like that during the various world wars. Um, I'm not quite sure it's ever turned into full-throated racist hatred of Germans, however. But there's obviously it's difficult to keep the line that this is those guys in Moscow. It's not those people with the Kalashnikovs coming across the border necessarily.
Yeah, people hate Putin. They understand he's not all Russians. They also, they also look at opinion polls and reports from Russia. Those have massive caveats, of course. Can people really respond to them honestly if they're scared of the state? But based on my own experience in Russia, a lot of people support what the government is doing. They have been bombarded for decades and decades and decades with absolutely insane propaganda. The idea that Russia is wronged, Russia is the victim, Russia should be expanding, Russia should be reclaiming its greatness. This has just been hammered into people for a very, very long time. And I knew some lovely people who would come out with the most blood-curdling imperialist nonsense because they'd just had years and years and years of it. So yeah,
Did you
it's a
find yourself having to combat your own this type of prejudice on the other side of people who sort of see the Russians as Asiatic hordes coming to rape and loot?
I've never had anyone say that to me, no. I don't who says that?
Well, so some of the extremist Ukrainians are alleged to have said that. For a long
Okay.
time, all you had to do was all the Putinistas would talk about the Azov Brigade and pet Euro-fascists and whatever, evoking ancestral memories, false memories, falsely recovered memories. But it's the way that we do wars. I mean, you just think of this country, the US, when in the war with towel heads, Islamics,
Mm-hmm.
everybody was a terrorist. And while we might sort of sneer about the Russians, we have to remember that the voices against the Iraq war were fairly thin on the ground when it started. I know I was one of them, and
Yeah.
at the moment there's a lot more licensed opposition, but that's because the governments uh, the governments are crude and unsophisticated in their push. But still, I
Yeah.
mean, look at the mega crowd. It shows you can see where Putin gets the impetus from.
Sure. Look, we have crappy narratives in society that stereotype and reduce people to one thing. We have a very strong far right in all of our countries, in Ukraine, in Russia, in the UK, in the US. We see what they do. It's very, very dangerous, and this kind of language is very dangerous. But I don't think you'd find a war where people haven't done that. I'm sitting in a building which was built by a German industrialist, and it was taken off him in the First World War. He didn't do anything wrong. He was just German. This is sadly what happens. I mean, I think what's really interesting to me is kind of the narratives and who do people think they are and the stories that we tell about ourselves. And obviously, I'm talking largely about Ukrainians because that's where I've been for the last few years. One thing that I think humans always do when confronted with terrible atrocities is to make ourselves feel better by saying, well, we could never do that. And therefore the people who did it must be sort of genetically messed up in some way. They must be different from us. They must be completely beyond the pale. And of course we're all capable of terrible things. And to say that we're not is just a cop out, but it makes people feel better. So you find that narrative all down history, don't you?
Yes, we tend to find that our side wouldn't do things like that, would they? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Hiroshima, Mile, Abu Ghraib, and whatever else notwithstanding, we're better than that. We're different. And it's amazing how deeply that gets into it. So, I mean, as when you're reporting, did you have to consciously militate against these inbuilt prejudices of the society and the editors around you?
In Ukraine?
No, I'm talking about your editors back home for whom you were writing.
No, no, my editors aren't biased, and they don't tell me what to say. There's a great concept perception that they do, and I'm not quite sure why. Like, I'm not working for Sputnik, so yeah, clearly. No,
Norm Murdoch, obviously.
no, but I think even the reporting on Ukraine that my colleagues do in print in the BBC, Sky, whatever, I hear a lot that it's so biased and prejudiced, and I cannot find anything that's incorrect about it. I don't know what the line is supposed to be that we're peddling, but I just think they're all doing a decent job. Like they're reporting on a war. You mentioned objectivity. I think a lot of people struggle with this, and certainly I don't. When it comes to fascism, I'm against that. That's very easy for me to take a side in that regard. It doesn't mean that I would, if the Ukrainian side did something wrong, I would report on it. I don't let that shape my reporting. Um, but yeah, I'm a human being in all this.
No, there's a particular case of I call it the ghosts of the Third International. People who thought that Russia saved us in World War II, and that Putin was a successor to them, and that they can really do no wrong, or we should cut a lot of slack for them. And
Oh, they're just Stalinist, I mean, I'm familiar with them. Yeah, we've got a lot of them, tankies everywhere. It's insane. I knew it. I've always been on the left, and the stuff that people come out with now, it just boggles my mind. I remember thinking like, well, when I come back the first time, I thought like because I've studied this part of the world all my life. I speak Russian, understand Ukrainian. I've lived in both countries. Surely they'll listen to me. No, 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 no.
no,
So
it's okay. I've had experience. I mean, the minute I suggested that Slobodan Milosevic was not an angel, I
yeah.
got the wrath of the tankies pouring in on me.
Yeah, yeah. It's a shame. But people, I mean, look, my experience is that people are not open to they don't want to hear the opposing view. They have made their mind up. Um, they're not going to read my book. So it's really a waste of time for me to get annoyed with them.
Well, they should do. One of the problems in corresponding from eras like this is communications. How difficult was it to get your copy across?
Oh, look, Ukraine is like brilliantly, I mean, technologically, it's so far ahead of us and of yourselves in the US, if I may say. You can pay with contactless for like the best coffee, by the way, in some kiosk on a corner in a small town during an air raid siren. Do you know it's the internet's really widely available. It's some of the cheapest mobile internet in the world. Uh, it's yeah, it's never that's never the obstacle really reporting from Ukraine. Is getting copy and stuff back.
That would be not the case in Russia, I presume.
Well, if you used a VPN, yes, but there would be lots and lots of problems about that situation. I mean, I honestly am thankful every single day. There's a little part of me that just remembers to think, thank God I'm not in Moscow. I would rather be in Donbass in the heaviest shelling than be in Moscow for one minute longer.
Wow. I mean, I think one of the best Ukrainian propaganda initiatives was to use orcs as the term for the Russians. It's somebody thought they've stopped using it now, but in the initial stages, it was very effective to convey the emotional effect of what was going on.
Yeah, but
Especially,
then it is this again, it's the same dehumanizing thing that we were just talking about. I mean, the whole like Middle Earth thing was funny, right? Ukrainians are very good at jokes, and when they made that map that showed bits of Ukraine like mapped onto Middle Earth, and then there's Mordor, and you're like, no, that's really good crack. That is really funny. But I don't think calling lots of people orcs really helps. But it's also very much not my role to go and tell a bunch of massively traumatized and oppressed people what words they should use.
no, well, and I was thinking as a sort of propaganda tactician rather than a reporter there. That
Mhm.
it's it's a brilliant stroke of well, it's media manipulation, whatever way. Um, so did you at any point did you get close to worrying about your life? Were you close to the shelling, or were you in the sights of Russian snipers, or
I don't think I was in the sights of Russian snipers. No, I try to avoid the Russians, Ian. I did reporting from. I went with a drone team to do. They were doing like reconnaissance and then a bomber drone kind of run, and that was just on the border north of Kharkiv, where the Russians had trenches because they came right down that bit and then they were pushed back. And yeah, it was an interesting day because everything's about drones, and then and they're I'm with these young guys and they're like getting their drones ready and it's all quite jolly and then suddenly there's this noise above us. And I mean, and it's not, it's a Russian drone, right? And we don't know what kind it is, we don't know if it's a bomber drone, and there is nowhere to hide because all the trees have been blown up and the trenches are really shallow and you just think, oh well, shit, here we are. Um and I've been in cities when they've been hit a bit as well. The thing is, I find nothing is scary when there's other people with you, you know. Whereas when you're on your own, everything can be scary.
Uh-huh. Oh, and with Ukraine, the tankies we were talking about, the pro-Putinistas sort of t still managed to creep onto the internet with tales of unwilling conscripts dragged off the streets of Ukraine and forced into uniform against their
That's
will.
true.
Well, yes, it's true, but they don't say that this is what the Russians are doing. It's what the British and Americans were doing during their wars as well.
Sure, sure. Look, it's a really tricky thing. Like I see, if you're a journalist in Ukraine, one of the big things that's been happening is that mobilization has been becoming tougher and that more people are being forcibly mobilized. And you have a duty to report on that. It's a big story. Just because it makes you feel uncomfortable and, doesn't quite fit with the narrative that might be, oh, Ukraine's like blameless. And I'm not necessarily blaming them. Like, what else are they meant to do? But it's
Well,
if
no other country where they're faced with threats like that has relied on all volunteer forces.
I think in that this is why context is in reporting is so important. And often we miss out the context. We don't have time or we don't have the background knowledge. One of the really interesting things about conscription in Ukraine, I find this really interesting, is that, the US and the UK have been pressuring Ukraine massively to lower the conscription age from 27, and they've lowered it to 25. And that caused outrage in Ukraine. Whereas here, we're the other way around. We recruit children in the UK. We recruit 16-year-old people who cannot even vote. And the Ukrainians, their attitude is that the
So you
young,
so you have to be 25 before you're eligible for the draft in the Ukraine.
yes, exactly, because they think the young people are the future and the older ones should go to fight. And we have the opposite mindset. I think theirs is better. And that's just a little bit of context that, I would put into reporting if I was covering the forced mobilizations. It's not because I'm trying to like justify it or anything. I just think that's important to know. It's part of the story I would tell you if I was talking to you in the pub about this. And that's how I try and think about telling stories, like tell a story, right?
Yeah, and envisaging yourself leaning on a bar in a pub is the best way to do it, in my
Yeah,
experience.
yeah.
You
It
get
was, well,
you get the
also it
ground,
stops
you
you
get the context, as you
if
said.
you're starting to be boring, you can't be boring in a pub because somebody will interrupt you.
Yes. Uh, pub talks were my speciality. Um, as befits somebody who wrote a book on rum and another one on tequila, amongst other
Hmm.
things. So it's but that's sort of colloquial, not colloquial, conversational tone. I mean, that's what I liked about one of the many things I liked about your book was that it was informative without being didactic.
Good. That was the aim. I wanted to explain some of the history and the context without doing a kind of tangent, partly because I wanted to write something that I would want to read. And I've always struggled to read quite dry stuff, it just doesn't go in. I need a character, I need a narrative, I need some morals. And so I thought I'd try and explain, things like the history of Lviv, but I tried to explain it with place names and like make you feel like you're standing there on that big avenue with me at this time in 22. Um, and with anecdotes and people and places. And I think I hope that is easy to read and easy to understand. But I really did want to get the context in because I want people to understand why this war has happened and what it's about.
And when was the last time you were there?
February. Yeah, February. I was there when Trump was getting back in. And it was funny because here everyone was saying, "Oh my God, what's going to happen? You're going to Kharkiv on Trump's inauguration day. What if they bomb it?" And then I got to Kharkiv and didn't talk about Trump for a whole week because me and my friends were busy. You know, there was like my friend launched a poetry book. There was some great theatre. There was a sculpture exhibition. We were busy. We're busy with arts. Never mind Trump. It was great.
Let's, God, escaping from Trump in this world is a
Yeah, it's good to
mystery, they
Kharkiv.
say.
Yes.
In fact, I see the Ukrainians have just withdrawn his the puzzling nomination for his Peace Prize.
All right.
Uh, but the Pakistanis are persisting. Obviously, they're
Okay.
waiting for another war with India, and they hope for his to be on side. Uh, so,
Yeah.
what was the reaction to his statements and his let's just say leanings towards Putin?
I mean, there's a lot of dismay, but to be honest, they a lot of the people I know there, they just took it in their stride, you know, they're like, we've always known that it's kind of us against them and we might lose support. And here we are, we'll just keep going. There's a lot of kind of stoicism that I found.
You know, we recently had on Craig Unger, for sort of a best-selling author who's written several books, basically detailing the connections between Trump and the FSB, the KGB, and all of the successor organizations. And it's quite shocking that it's not more of a scandal than it is. It's difficult to say it's definitive, but it definitely is. There is a leaning there, and it's difficult to well, no, Trump is difficult to explain under any circumstances.
Is he? I was in the US for a few weeks, like for the first time quite recently. And I don't know, man. I spoke to a lot of lovely people who seemed to be at a complete loss to understand what was happening in their country. And I don't find it that, maybe I'm being a bit grand here. I don't find it that puzzling. You know, like populism is happening everywhere, and there are some very stark and obvious causes of it. And one of them is soaring inequality and people being pissed off. I'm not saying they're justified in their voting choice, but like,
Oh no, that's indisputable. We saw that in Britain and all the rest of
yeah,
Western Europe as well. But in the particular case of Trump, the question is whether is actually ideologically motivated, or whether it is, holding open his wallet for the latest contribution, or whether it is sheer ego and caprice on his part, which we saw some signs of when he suddenly turned on Netanyahu halfway through the bombing campaign, because
sure.
Netanyahu he perceived Netanyahu as snubbing him.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He's just having fun. He's just having fun, you know? I don't think he has any ideology. I mean, he has a vague ideology about like money. It's kind of it, right? And like
Well,
America, sort of. I don't
okay,
know.
well, yeah, because he's been called neoliberal, he's been called
Yeah, but he's not
paleocentric,
really.
but
I
he's
mean,
not.
it's
No.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's funny.
Anyway, we're talking about Ukraine because
Yes, let's talk
one
about Ukraine.
one of it's difficult. Zelensky, hero or villain. I mean, found it quite engaging that a comedian should become the leader of a country at war, and a very successful one. And he certainly, I think, he has risen to fill the role in many ways. Um, might not be perfect, but I think nothing got so much support as when Trump and Vance and the other thugs in the White House in the Oval Office were ganging up on him. How
Hmm.
did that go down in Ukraine?
Uh, they made lots of jokes about it. I saw some friends saying that it was the first time they really felt proud of Zelensky. It's not. They're joking. It's not true, right? But like, I mean, most people I know, say quite a few of them voted for him, but they weren't like wild about him, and they think he's done a broadly good job. And I think they're right. You know, that video. Do you remember the sort of selfie video that him and the PM and maybe chief of defense and stuff? They were outside the presidential buildings in Kiev. It was like I don't know, 24 hours into the whole thing, and it was dark, and they were holding up the camera like this, and he was smiling and saying this very reassuring way, "My tut, we're all here. You know, I'm here. The prime minister's here. We're not going anywhere." And I think that you cannot underestimate what that did for people. You know, he could have left. I mean, other leaders would have left, and he was under pressure to leave. And I think the
Certainly,
fact
the
that he,
people who were ganging him in the White House would have been on a helicopter up to the hills in a bunker in no time at all.
100%, yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think for all that, he's done a very good job. His approval ratings are still reasonably high for someone who's been in power for a few years and has been, had to take all these incredibly unpopular decisions during a war. Um,
But is
and as
this
for
the
him,
sort of Churchill effect, or I mean, does he reflect any other currents in Ukrainian policy?
I think, I mean, his did he win 78% of the vote, I think, when he was elected? It was a huge, huge thing. And partly that's because he promised to end the war, in the East. And partly they just wanted a change from the same old, same old. Uh, and people say about him being a comedian, like, what's wrong with that? I think that's
Nothing.
great.
Hey,
Yeah.
I'm from Liverpool. I'm only in favor of comedians.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Comedians, it
just
does.
I'd take a comedian over a sort of career politician, you know what I mean?
Yes, comedians are better than clowns, as we're seeing with Trump.
Yeah, I think people have an idea that comedians are sort of actors or they're good at lying. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think comedians are very good at tapping into certain elements of their personality and certain ways of communicating, which you can see that he's very, very good at. And if it is a Churchill effect, well, look what happened to Churchill after the war. I'm sure he can expect to be turfed out of office once elections are possible, which I don't think they are during wartime.
Yes, for which, of course, the Western press that regards Churchill as the icon of all war leaders is continually how how can they be democratic when they don't have elections?
It's nuts, isn't it? Also, the thing about him not wearing a suit, it's like, does anyone remember Churchill's boiler suit?
I
He
do.
did get it made at like Savile Row, but still, it was a boiler suit, and he wore it to a lot of international meetings. And it was definitely not a suit because he thought it was appropriate. He was a wartime leader.
Well, this is what happens with these sort of ad hominem type articles. You pick on who the good guys and the bad guys are, and it doesn't matter what they do. So Elon Musk can turn up in a motley attire and dance in front of the cameras, and that's perfectly okay. That's statesmanlike. And Trump can wear his ridiculous MAGA hats, and everyone's supposed to applaud.
Mm.
Many of us think it's. I've always thought those baseball caps as IQ adjusters. You put one on and it reduces your IQ by 50%, but that would be difficult in some cases.
Oh, I don't know. I come from a baseball hat kind of place.
Well, sorry. It's my snobbish Liverpool background.
Oh, I've always thought Liverpool was the least snobby place
I know,
I've ever
but
been
baseball
to.
caps are different.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
so what's your next assignment? You're going. I think you said you were going. You're going with the mine the mine group.
Yeah, I'm going to Mykolaiv on Friday. Yeah, a few days. Oh my God, no time. Going to Mykolaiv to write about deminers. They've been trained abroad and now they're trying to decontaminate Ukraine. And it's, as you know, probably it's not necessarily all landmines. It's UXO because a lot of the mortars and stuff they don't explode, and so they clear land largely so that farmers can get it back into use. So I'll do that. I might stay a bit. I'm not quite sure. It's I'm from the north of Scotland and we do not cope well with heat. And I say southern Ukraine in the height of summer is a bit hard for me. -26, totally fine, absolutely fine with that. Done a lot of that. But yeah, 38 degrees. Oh no, bit tricky.
Well, don't come to New York in the near future.
I never would come to New York in the summer. No, good Lord, absolutely not. Absolutely, I did love it though. I have to say on my trip recently, it's very very interesting.
Well, has anybody got any questions from the audience? Because we should be winding up soon and let Jen get back to her literary labors, which you can tell
Packing.
us about. Next book.
Oh, I'd love to do another book. So what I want to look at is Moldova, Balkans, Baltic states, Poland, Romania. The war is there. They're building defensive lines in some of these places. I think Moldova is in severe danger if you listen to the kind of statements that have been coming out of Kremlin. And we know that pattern, oh, we must defend the Russian speakers. And I'm really interested in, as I said, like the narratives, the identities that people have there, how that's changing how they are the changing way that people think about World War II and the Cold War and what happened to Eastern Europe at that time, because I don't think that was ever really properly acknowledged, particularly in this country. And partly I want to have a book that I can hit Western leaders over the head, not that I get to meet many, and say, can you please understand that, there's a very grave danger in Europe and you do need to, I mean, maybe we're saying that today at this NATO summit, but you need to take this seriously and you need to take defense spending seriously.
Have you been to the Baltics at all?
I have not. I would love to. At the moment, my plan is if I can get a wee camper van, right, then I can drive around and do a book like that. So if anyone in the UK wants to sell me a really cheap camper van, then that's my current quest.
Or to sponsor you for a
Yeah,
trip around the Baltics?
yeah, yeah. No, I was in Moldova in January, and I really do want to go back there. I think there's a lot for me to learn there. I want to learn about that place and everything to do with kind of language and identity and ethnicity is really shifting there, and it's really interesting.
Maybe we should remind people that Moldova is Romanian speaking, but I think to everyone's surprise, including mine, chose not to go in with Romania when the Soviet Union broke up.
Mm-hmm.
But then they
Mm-hmm.
got
And
Transnistria foisted
they
on.
do have Transnistria. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of everything we're talking about, Kremlin influence, the way that Europe is I mean, a lot of people I met in Romania pretty cynical about Europe and particularly Brussels. Um,
Well,
yeah, there's
that
tons to dig
comes
into.
with the
So
territory.
yeah, so I'd like to roam around and learn some more languages and talk to lots and lots and lots of people in my van.
Okay, I think we should be winding up now, but let's
Okay.
have another final pitch for the book, Night Train to Odessa, covering the human cost of Russia's war by Jen Stout. An engaging and informative read, and should be anyone going for the famous media studies or journalism courses should read it. It'd probably be far more useful than a full term of lectures from on theory and practice.
I would always recommend that people study what they find interesting rather than the kind of vocational journalism course. I studied sociology and Russian, and it was incredibly useful to me.
Yeah, no, I thought you were. I didn't realize it was sociology you were studying. That must be an interesting field. But look,
I honestly, it's great. Sorry. Yeah.
yeah, no, thanks very much, Jen. I don't want to prolong it past its sell-by date because we want to get this out to people as fast as possible. Look forward to hearing from you. Do keep in touch if with your adventures anytime. And if you come to New York when the climate is more
Mm-hmm.
sort of amenable to a delicate Arctic flower from the Shetlands. Uh,
Yes.
we welcome you. We welcome you. It's uh,
Thank you.
it's just across the Vikings. The Vikings pioneered the route. Welcome to Vinland when the time comes.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to speak to you.
Thanks, Jen. This is Ian Williams with the Foreign Press Association in New York, and we're very proud to have had Jen Stout, Night Train to Odessa, prize-winning book. You won awards from the BBC and from the Saltire Society, first book, etc., etc. So it's well worthy of them. And
Thank
now we'll
you.
get back to the heat wave and all the other wars going on. Thanks very much, Jen. See you again
Okay.
soon, I hope.
Goodbye.